You always have to remember it's nobody's to take, it's the parents to give. And the greatest gift a parent can give is not the asset itself. It's actually the information at a time where time is still on the side of the younger generation so they can plan. They'll say, where do you start? I say coffee. If you can talk your folks into having coffee, that's all you have to sell them into.
Welcome back to the Future of Beef show, where we explore the innovations, strategies, and success stories shaping the next era of beef production. I'm your host, Jim Johnson from Brands and Barbed Wire. As usual, I've got my global specialists with us today, Dr. Jessica Sperber, feedlot specialist from the University of Nebraska, and Ian Wheel, founder of Breeder, the cattle tech company championing producer-led beef supply chains. As always, you'll find additional resources and tools at thefutureofbeef.com with a free trial to Breeder app to take your operation to the next level. We've got an exciting episode for you today. I'm joined by Alan Hojer, Keep Farmers Farming, and we're really going to talk about succession planning and helping families transition ranches to the next generation. Really an exciting topic, I think, today, and one that we've had a lot of interest in. Ian, tell us a little bit about maybe your background there and why it's interesting to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And, as coming into this is going to be an emotional topic, but also very excited for this. Obviously, we had a brief discussion with Nick Jorgensen on a previous one. And now out of the back of that, we've got Alan here. And, for me, this has been something that, in our family, in fact, every family deals with in a different way. And I think I had parents who sat us down from a very young age and took us through this, and incredibly grateful for everything they did to sort of help us go through that transition period, and still are. It's not a one-day thing. It happens over decades. And but because of that, I think, but then even in that, there was challenges, right? And it certainly wasn't done perfectly. And so it's great to have someone like you here today, Alan, just to really talk us through it. We have one family. We had good lawyers and accountants involved, but I think what you're doing is very exciting, where you're actually helping consult and being that business coach as much as anything else. So, thanks for being here today. And, I think it'd be great. Yeah, it'd be great to looking forward to talk to it. And it'd be great just to get a bit of an intro and understand all the things you've been up to and what brought you to here.
Sure. No, first of all, thanks for having me. What a great opportunity, not just for myself of being in this profession now for 11 years, but for agriculture, because this is the most important thing that we have to accomplish. And at the end of the day, if we don't, people won't have peace. And peace is what we're looking for. And that's something I learned over 11 years, that search for peace is what each ranch and farm family is really looking for. Yeah, so I'm with the Keep Farmers Farming program, which is a division of the South Dakota Ag Foundation today. It transitioned from First Dakota National Bank on January 1st. The program actually started 11 years ago with First Dakota National Bank, and it was just an idea. And I got involved actually in about 2013, right in that area. I had neighbors. They were calling me, asking me, how do we think we can transition our family operation with what we have? Because we actually started our operation in 1992 with 10 cows and $25,000. And we're just working it. And they're watching us working it. I think everybody thought we wouldn't make it, but we did. But through those conversations and being involved in that, I found that I liked it. I was inspired. I wanted to be more involved in that type of work. And so that was the evolution that started me down this pathway. And then there's a story how I got to First Dakota National Bank. But yeah, what a great opportunity, and to share what I've been through in the last 11 years with you guys today.
Yeah, I think it's great. I know as I've interviewed multiple ranches, on Brands and Barbed Wire, we see varying types of succession planning. Some of them are fairly organic. It just happens, right? And then some of them really develop a culture or a philosophy around it. Tell us a little bit more about, some of those different types maybe, and some of the different philosophies that you've been engaged with on succession planning, and then maybe get into the scope of what you do and
Sure.
and how you really get into this with certain families and operations, because we know that operations and families are now different, right?
Correct.
I mean, we've talked about that, and so tell us a little bit about that.
It's interesting because they've always been different. We're now starting to recognize the differences and the variabilities in each and every operation. But if you understand that every operation is on a journey from simple to more complex, that begins to head you down a road to try to understand what's unique about this family and their journey that they're going through, from a business standpoint. Then you put the variability of people in there, the different stages of life and what they're going through individually. Think of all the different pieces that have to work together. For some people, time is no longer an asset. For other people, time's on their side. None of us know, but when you're in our 30s and 40s and 20s, we think of time being much more of an asset than we're in our 70s and 80s. And so working with those families, try to help them understand who they are, try to normalize some of this, because to your point earlier, Ian, this is a very imperfect process. It's very imperfect, and yet people have an idea, a dream, a vision. We want them to have a vision because we're going to get into talking about vision. And they think they're trying to achieve something with a very imperfect road, a lot of curves in it. And as a result, people don't know what to do.
Yeah,
interesting.
It's interesting when you say that. It's like it's far from perfect, and it's like I think even in my personal life and family and stuff, like expectation can be the killer of like what things are of a good idea, right? And you have in ranching, it's an unbelievable one of like, how do you even get people aligned? Like sometimes it's obvious that there's a father and a mother, and then the son or daughter who's going to take it over. But when you've got multiple families and all of that sort of stuff, when you're starting this journey, how do you get those expectations aligned? How do you get people to not sort of one wants more, one wants less? Like that friction in a family can break it up, but it certainly can build bitterness. And where do you approach that, and how do you approach that from the start?
Great question, because we think this family bond will hold us together, right?
Yeah,
that's not the trick. Because that actually, we have so much emotional commitment to that it actually pulls us apart. But the one thing that can unify all that and hold it together is called a vision. We have to find agreement on the vision. What is the vision? And that can be different than the past, but what is the vision today that everybody owns? We can begin to put strategy together to support that overall vision. I want to give you a little story about vision. Can I? Is that okay?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I actually was working with an operation. It was in May of 2024, so that's pretty fresh, right? And we were having a big family meeting, and I was in a boardroom and collected my thoughts. They're going to come in at 2:00, and it's important 2:00. But at 1:45, I just wrote in the top of a flip chart. I put the word vision on top of that flip chart, and I was leaning against the table, my arms crossed, just trying to collect my thoughts. And the door opened. And in walked a staff member just to see if that little fire underneath the coffee pot was still burning, looked at it, turned around, looked at my chart and said, vision. In the Bible, it says, without vision, we shall perish. And he walked out. At 2:00, the family came in. I was missing something in this work until that moment. I always knew vision was important. But until that moment, it told me that's where we begin with every operation. And if we can achieve a picture of a vision that doesn't mean we can't change it, but we have to start there because of all the different ideas and everything else. It was huge to my work, but I think it's huge to every operation.
And so how do you get people to align on that vision? Because I'm sure as you get into an operation and depending on the size of it, everyone sort of has different visions for the operation. And it may align with enterprises, right? Someone may have the cow enterprise, someone may have the farming enterprise, somebody may have the hunting enterprise within an operation. And so how do you align those on an overall vision for the entire operation?
Yeah, great point. You could have a lot of individual. I actually call that structure. We have structure within the business, which aligns with the pheasant operation or the cattle operation or the feed. That's business structure we have to have in place. The visions, in my opinion, is much larger than that. We've decided that we're going to collectively keep this operation together, and all of us are going to commit ourselves, our resources to that overall goal. Then we can start to work on the business structures to make sure we're running an efficient operation and utilizing the assets and everything. Structure really begins to fall in place if we really have a defined, which can change, vision that we can be inspired to. Now we're no longer obligated to be at the farm. We're inspired to be at the farm. Same assets, same farm, but how you look at it changes how people approach it. All of a sudden, they're willing to work on structure, all those different areas we have to work on, because there's a bigger picture that we're all unified.
Yeah, and then the other thing I see is within those enterprises, some of them are smaller than some of the others, and as they break down, you see those strengths of each person start to they divide up. When they do divide up operations, if they don't have some type of thing like this to help them, they sort of divide up the cropping and the cattle and different things and take those pieces themselves, and so I think it's how do you move from that individual ownership into that vision, and then managing those personalities. And I think one thing you talk about is culture,
right?
And how does that involve in all this getting these families to work together on some of this stuff?
Yeah, the culture evolves over time, but at least we have to agree on that up front, kind of what that is and what we're trying to work towards to support the overall vision. We'll do a lot of one-offs. I'll do a lot of one-offs with different family members. We'll have group family meetings. We may even perform what they call strategic planning, which allows people to put their thoughts in based on a set of questions. Usually use a SWOT analysis, and we add some specialized questions to it, which people can add information anonymously. The information comes to me, and I come back and present it to the family. And at least that'll help us set a set of priorities that we can agree on to go to work on. Let's say we come out with 12 priorities. Well, nobody can work on 12 priorities at once, but then together they get to vote on what are the top 2 or 3 so we can go to work on them. It's not that they're all not important, but you just can't work on that many. But again, that working together begins to support the culture, because now we have an understanding what the overall picture is.
So then does that kind of highlight how important a third-party moderator is in the scenario in order to come to those top 3 or top 2 priorities of the group?
Great point. I think it's a place where you need to have a third party. And I think, and the question is, who can play that role, third party? Can it be an attorney? My opinion, it cannot. Can it be a banker? Probably not. Can it be an accountant? It's no disrespect to those professions, because there's points when we need those professions, we pull them in. But you're asking them to do something that I'm saying they're not qualified to do, and they're not going to be able to stay in the game for the years it takes. And so this truly is a specialized approach to be in there. And I don't sell anything. I think that's important to note. This is a consulting position. I don't sell investments, life insurance, or anything like that. We design the program so we're truly listening, and we're helping families through this without being connected to sales of some kind, except they pay a consulting fee, and that's important because it not only holds me accountable, and I am the only consultant today, but it also holds the family accountable, so we're working on this stuff. Very important.
Yeah, and I think the interest you have then is the success of the operation. You don't have ulterior interests that also challenge you. And I think it's for our viewers, I just want to make sure, if you don't know what a SWOT is, it's not a team, right? It's strengths.
No one's getting taken out.
That's right. You're not calling in SWAT teams. It's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that challenge your operation, and those are all time based and stuff like that. So if you don't know what SWOT is, I just want to clarify that up front. So you've worked with over 400 ranching families up to this point, and tell us a little bit about maybe some of those tensions and things that give us an example of some of the things these families struggle with.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff that I look for up front is, and I call them my different disciplines I'm looking for as I get into the families. Who is giving? Is there anybody taking? And how are we receiving? Okay, they're just words. But this whole transitional process is very giving. Everybody has to give.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no question the older generation, if they own the assets, control the wealth at that point, they need to give. And the greatest gift a parent can give is not the asset itself. It's actually the information at a time where time is still on the side of the younger generation so they can plan. Because, they can't just give all their assets. They still need to live. But most people, I'm not saying there's somebody out there that doesn't like to give at all. They just don't know how. When I find somebody that's really retaining on to that piece and not giving that well, I start to have these one-offs. Nobody wants to hurt their family, but they don't know where to start. Now, I've also been in those where the receiving was so terrible that they couldn't give. They couldn't give. So how you receive can really impact how people give. And in fairness to those, they've started to give up on the operation, and they're thinking about leaving because they just don't have the information. And so there's a balance between those three that I'm looking for. And as soon as I kind of get that picture built, then I know where I need to spend my time individually to help people understand what they're going through, so we can normalize this. And by the way, agriculture is going through this, and they don't realize it's not just unique to any individual farm or ranch operation. This is a level of transition that agriculture has never went through before. And if you can believe that, all of a sudden it normalizes who you are in that mix. Very important.
So you say this is a transition that agriculture has never went through before.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's fascinating because as I got involved in this 11 years ago, I had to try to figure out just what's going on. I was given a one-page sheet of paper and said, here you go. We have to help agriculture with the transition of wealth. And that was it. And so when I'm working with these families over these 11 years, I've tried to understand not only my own family, but other families. And I went back to the grandpa levels, which my grandfather came through the 30s and tried to study transition back then and all the way through. But if you go back to the Homestead Act and you work up through World War II, if you think about that time frame, agriculture was just in survival. Mm-hmm. You had the dirty 30s, you had World War I, we had the stock market crash, you had World War II. I bet there wasn't a lot of transitional conversation at the table. Yeah. I think we can assume that. If you go post-World War II, there was a lot of wealth that was piled up in cash coming out of World War II because America was feeding the world. And if you look at the prices of corn, and you can Google this stuff as what they actually receive for corn and beans and beef back in the day, the farmers were being paid very, very well, and they were piling up cash. And I say that with respect to what was going on, but in estate planning, I kept hearing how Grandpa bought 3 ranches in 1952 or 4 farms in 1962 or whatever, up through the late 60s. So if you wish to farm a ranch, the common theme was the oldest got the home place. You want a farm? I'll buy you one. I'll buy you one. Transition complete. They never intended for their children to be in business together. They just bought them a farm or bought them a ranch. Mm. You hit the 70s, and land values were beginning to rise. And so it was no longer all that possible just to buy them a farm or buy them a ranch. So you've seen the expansions of the farms to bring in the next generation. That money was on variable interest rates. And then the 80s hit.
Ever wondered if you could be getting more out of your cattle?
Breeder is the first technology company that's able to track and optimize cattle from conception all the way to the rail.
This puts the power of data into the hands of the rancher and enables them to improve their profit line quicker than they ever have before.
My decision to partner with Breeder was made largely after seeing a demo where I realized what Breeder's doing is unlike anyone else in our industry. Connecting the data from the packing plant back to the feedlot, the stocker backgrounders, and the cow-calf, even connecting that data to the purebred breeder, will just open the door to improvement at a scale and a speed that we have never seen in this industry before.
I believe Breeder's putting ranchers in the driver's seat. We can make breeding decisions based on large amounts of data very quickly. The calves that are produced, they have a higher cutout value, their ribeyes are more profitable, and it plays back to us.
As I'm out around the country, people are asking me about Breeder, and I always recommend Breeder. It's the tool for the future.
And then there was a generation that we lost.
Yeah.
I came home in 1981. I didn't know I wasn't going to farm, came home, and I got the message at that point. In fairness to my folks, it was the right thing to do. You've got a college education, you need to go. And that was my story. And there's all kinds of so we lost a generation in there. So now we get into where we are today, starting about in 2000. I'm going to say we had a recovery period. So from 2006 to 2009, government policy, ethanol, a lot of wealth, a lot of things going on in agriculture that made it possible for people to begin to bring their kids back into the operation. And yet the only transitional experiences that people have is the one that they went through. And so if the only transitional experience that you have was your folks bought you a farm and ranch, they don't know what to do. They don't know where to start. I'm not saying there weren't some that made it through it. I am saying on a broad scale, this is a transitional experience that agriculture's never went through.
That really resonates with me. Like I think about like how good my parents were from a transition and like talking, still going through the transition of the asset, but it's always been assumed it would never be a family business.
Right.
It's always been, and now my old man was born in 33, so he probably fits into that similar generation to what your parents were. And so he's passed now, but it was, it was just always assumed we're going to be different. You might run yours, you might run yours, or, back when I was coming through, go get a college education, farming's not the future, and you end up now, it's in your blood, and I'm back here now in the beef industry, but we all go off and do something slightly different. But, there's that side of things in terms of how you plan a business, because that's very different to being an owner operator. And how do you sit down with these families who may have had that and sit down and go, okay, we're not going to build in some ways a corporate structure or a business and, all the things that come with that, like employee development and all of that, now I've walked in the corporate world, that comes sort of second nature in the corporate world. You have one-on-to-ones, you develop people. How do you get, an older generation to work with that? How do you help the younger generation who may not have gone into the corporate world to understand how you move to that position?
Yeah, great point, because if you've never worked for corporate America, been out there in a lot of structure, it's just a word that people really don't have an understanding for. But I still come back to, if we have a vision, if we have a vision that we believe in, we're committed to, those conversations about incorporation of structure, of which they haven't experienced, but are willing to really listen to and learn if we have a vision, because they realize they need to do these things in order to make sure that vision is successful. And by the way, I'm not in the camp that every operation is going to be held together. I'm in the camp, what is the successful vision for that operation? Because many of these operations will fragment, and that was the successful vision. That's not failure. For whatever reason they fragment, that doesn't mean it was failure. It just means we're not going to keep it unified. But the key is, what is the vision that we've agreed upon, so we deploy the right strategy of structure or whatever else that we need to do. Make sense?
So, yes, one of the strategies of structure that I hear a lot, and obviously probably around my generation, but also my parents, was, the older farmers they weren't going to stop farming. So at what point did they allow the decision making to be their children's decision making, and should have it been handed down? Or how do you encourage the operation vision being handed down to the up and coming generation? At what point is it like, okay, maybe your 60-year-old son can or daughter can take over your operation now?
Correct.
And how do you intervene in those scenarios?
And it's 60 too late. Should have happened at 25.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, and I'll get that, I believe transition should not be starting in our 60s. The transition should start late 30s and early 40s. And this is what it starts with, a lot of thought, because we have a lot of time on our hands. But the only way you can have that kind of productive thought is if you have information from the older generation, and if you're involved in the operation, all the things that you just said. I agree 100%. And it seems like I keep going back to the vision, but even if the older generation believes in that vision, they soon realize, unless they transition all that decision making and all those things, it doesn't have a chance of being successful. We do have, it's one thing just to talk the talk. Now we're having monthly meetings, and within that monthly meeting, we have a financial segment. We have all these different things going on a monthly basis. When I enter a transitional job, I'll say it that way, I won't do it unless I can be involved for a year and a half. I know it's going to take that long to get the culture in place and kind of sift out all the things that are going on. If they're not willing to commit to a year and a half, that tells me they're not willing to commit to what they're going through. It's not about the cost of what it is to hire myself or keep farmers farming into the program. The cost of not doing it is much, much greater, just in lack of peace of mind. And so those things, again, fall in place if we're committed to a vision, but it takes that third party to hang in there and stay in there and be willing to do the one-offs and whatever we need to do to accomplish everything that you're talking about, because it's hard. Mm-hmm. People say this shouldn't be that hard. I'm telling you, it is that hard. You have to accept that. That's the norm.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit maybe about what that year and a half looks like. So you start out with a meeting, you have a follow-up meeting, you bring in, certain other aspects to help them with certain things. I mean, for the people viewing, I mean, give us sort of an example and a general, I know they're all different, but a generalized example of what that year and a half sort of beginning to end might look like for us.
Yeah, great point. The end's hard to describe because I never know when the end is. I've got some operations I've been involved with for 8 years, and they want me to stay in there. So, but the beginning is, number one, I need to know who the client is. And that pretty well, as it jumps out, it could be the parents, but it might not be, but I need to know who the client is. And it could be multiple people that are the clients, because they need that collective decision whether to bring myself on board. And once they bring myself on board, then immediately let's put together all the contact information of everybody that's going to be involved here. And I'm going to quickly do some one-offs with phone calls with everybody just to introduce myself and let them know of the decision that the client's made. If it's a parent, I do ask the parents to set up the call, tell them you hired this guy, this is kind of what I am, but don't overthink it. He's going to be giving you a call just to start the process. It's important to have that quality of an introduction because they're going to have questions. And it's interesting. I always say that how quickly we go from hello to, excuse the word, vomiting of information, because that's where the pain level is. It's all about the pain, how we reduce pain to find peace. And through those conversations, I'll start be writing on bullet points. We're going to get collectively together the following month, and we're going to start, number one, putting a financial system in place so we can work the farm together. Everybody assumes everybody has a financial system. Very few do. They have accounting systems, QuickBooks, Quicken, Easy Farm. And yes, they do balance sheets once a year for their bank. And yes, they might do a cash flow once a year, but there's no system out there where they're together, they're working that farm business every month. In other words, we're tracking it. We're going to do budgeting. And I believe everybody should be doing that anyway, but it creates a great conversation piece at that monthly meeting that becomes a constant. Many members of these farms have never seen the financials. They've never seen the checks, especially the spouses have never seen the amount of money that these farms are handling. And so it's a real eye-opener, but now they're part of that decision-making, which for the older generation, I tell you, that helps modify that because they're worried about losing control, and so they need to work this thing together. And so the financials are a constant. Then after that, again, the third party, I'm just thinking through what's going to be the next move to help them get towards their vision. If we agreed on a vision yet, if we haven't agreed on a vision yet, we got a lot of work to do looking back to figure out where did we come from and where we're going. Because if we don't know where we're going, it's awful hard, in my opinion, to deploy the strategy. And we got to make sure these operations will work.
When we talk about deploying strategy, I'm going to say a sentence to you, or like a term to you, Alan. Equal isn't always fair.
Yeah.
And I think we hear that a lot when we talk about succession planning. But I mean, I've seen it in a few different families. But for example, maybe one of the children wants to farm. The parents want to give equal to their two children. The other child does not want to farm, but they want the money from the operation. But the parents don't want to lose all the land by the other child selling. How in those scenarios, have you encountered scenarios like that? Mm-hmm. And how do you go about facilitating that challenge?
I've encountered those words a lot, and I will tell you, I really dislike those words because what happens, they really cause a dead end. People don't know what to do with those words. And a lot of those have came from attorneys, and they become marketing words that get used out there because people don't know what to do. And so I stay away from those words because I really believe what we're looking for is peace. And as we're looking for peace, I encourage people and the ones I work with, try to understand the visions of each of your children and the life paths that they've chosen, whether they're here on the farm or whether they're doing something else. And find yourself being inspired to support their vision in whatever they're doing. And look at first find peace for doing that. Then we'll go to the balance sheet and we'll figure out the strategies to approach that. And it's amazing how those words never come up again, but they deploy the balance sheet that way to support the visions of their children because they're inspired by that. If you think about it, if somebody finds peace, now they have hope again. And if you have hope, you don't feel hopeless. Mm-hmm. And those are the things we're all looking for.
What excites me about your approach you're saying there, and I think, is that, you know, if you go straight to like equal isn't fair or whatever on that side, then you're automatically thinking about money. Mm-hmm. And you're automatically thinking about not the value that farm could give you, but you're actually just thinking about the money that it could put in your pocket, which in some ways is like the wrong thing to think about. Like, could it be something that can help borrow money to start a business or something like that, which could be the best start you could ever have? Mm-hmm. Goes with it. And I also, you know, what really resonates with me is this information flow, like bringing it in and getting it to a manage. Like, again, like in the business I run now, like, yeah, we're looking at monthly accounts every month and we're going through it and you're analyzing it. You know, you use data to drive decision makings and less emotion, but it brings that next generation through. Like, it feels like the worst thing we could do is not give someone the keys and the ability to make decisions, let alone the money, not the ability to make decisions until they turn 60. Right. You know, that's too late. You know, you learn by making mistakes, you know, and you haven't had that opportunity to make mistakes.
And it's really too late if it's in the 80s and the 70s. We talk about the 60s. There's plenty of operations that are in the 70s and the 80s and haven't made that move yet.
Oh, no, that's what I mean is like my parents' age taking over the farm when they're 60. So now as a 30-year-old, you look at it like, well, their parent held on to the farm till they were 85 on decision making. So like when, and maybe you or other young producers listening, you know, you went to school, you learned all these maybe new technologies in animal science or agronomy or whatever you went for. And now when do you get the opportunity to try to deploy some of those opportunities on the farm? I'm very fortunate because my dad has always supported everything that I've learned. I mean, my PhD is basically his because he asks me everything that I've learned and that I still learn daily. But I mean, many operations do not have that transfer flow of knowledge, and the parents or whoever is running the operation, they're like, it's good the way it is right now. When we give you the opportunity to run it, you can deploy all those things.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You always have to remember it's nobody's to take, it's the parents to give if they're the asset holders, right? But you have to give it. It's one thing to say it, but you have to give it. And so if we can move from them to us, instead of to me, it's got to go to us first because we want their wisdom, we want their guidance. But if they willingly will let us run this thing together, then through that transition, it goes to the next generation. So therefore, it's not about putting anybody in the closet. It's about getting transparency and getting this thing out in the open in an organized manner. So we're running these businesses together. And ultimately, that becomes the approach and how they do estate planning and everything. But we have to normalize this process, guys. We have to normalize and get it out there. And the first step in that is people need to understand agriculture is going through this, which is impacting most every individual out there. And there is help out there. There's not a lot of help because the resources aren't there to the level it needs to be. I'm very confident I could transition any operation of any scale and any complexity today. How many people could say that? And the only reason I can say that because of what I've been through in the last 11 years. And I understand all these different pieces we have to get organized. Our challenge is how do we train people, get others to help agriculture, and we'll get there. But that's why we moved to the foundation.
Well, it's you know, when you talk about it like that, we spend money on nutritionists, we spend money on vets, we spend money on lawyers.
Well, with good reason on nutritionists.
Yeah. Sorry, Jess. Of course, especially you and Alan nutritionists. They're really good. But you know, we spend all this money, but yet like the biggest cost to us in probably over a 20, 30-year lifetime could be that transition. And yet most people think they're going to do it the way their dad did it, or they're not going to get an advisor in to help with that. And I think, you know, we get business consultants into, again, you learn from corporate America, there's business consultants all over the place. and, you know, succession planning and all of that happens there on a daily basis. So it's like, but I think, you know, it almost feels to me like once someone's decided to pick up the phone to you, they've made 90% of the effort,
Huge.
right? Like that's 90% of the job done.
Yeah.
How do you, when you run into someone, I'd say in the pub, but, you know, in a bar, you know, here, how do you, and someone says to you, well, you know, my son's not interested, or, you know, my dad wouldn't be interested in this. Like, what do you say to them to get them to have that first conversation to even consider bringing someone in?
Yeah, great point. They'll say, where do you start? I say coffee.
Yeah.
If you can talk your folks into having coffee, that's all you have to sell them into. Just give me some coffee time.
Sounds like, you know, when you talked about more people getting into this, sounds like a unique skill set, right? You got to be planner, facilitator,
Yeah.
part-time therapist, you know,
Marriage counselor.
right? I mean, there's a lot. I mean, it really is. I think that is a unique skill set, and not that there aren't people that have them, but I think that that type of patience and facilitating demeanor is important, you know, in this space. But maybe speak to some of that if you have some
great
experience
point,
there.
because we're actually analyzing that. Can we? I mean, I like it because I'm a visionary. I like problem solving. You know, it's right down my alleyway. But that's not everybody's built like that, and we've recognized that. But can we specialize different pieces of this? For example, if we decide that somebody needs a general partnership or an LLC or a subchapter S corp, nope, perfect. I'll have Tom be in touch with you next week instead of me spending that time. That would be an area that we think we can specialize in the financial side. And there's different areas we think we can specialize. Therefore, we get more specialized skill set. And we are looking at retired people as part of our scaling effort. Retired, you guys are retired someday, maybe want to get involved in this. Again, people looking for a purpose that have a skill set, farmers and ranchers. And so probably the greatest skill set is you actually lived it. When you live it and then you understand what you're going through, your ability to move people is incredible. We need to specialize.
Yeah, it seems really interesting. I mean, as you talk about some of this older generation that's you know, giving up on some of that and retiring, because I think, you know, as I looked generationally, you know, you would see a lot of, you know, before my generation, a lot of farmers and ranchers that worked until they died, and however old that was, they never stopped. But you start to see some of these people that are looking at, all right, how do I stop this? How do I retire somewhat, right, from this operation and do some other things? And some of those people that go through that might actually make good facilitators for the next one, right?
Absolutely.
My brother got my dad a very good vegetable patch that he had to farm. So it is, you're right. Most people, that's been their life. You know, that's their identity as well. Sorry.
No, I think the thing is not about forcing them into retirement, but they need to be involved in change. I call it exit planning. I believe if we have an operating entity, whether it's a LLC or or partnership, that everybody should want to get out of their operating entity at some point, the cattle, the equipment, the farming. Those people become the best mentors.
Yeah.
Because financially, they don't have a financial stake within that operating entity, but emotionally committed to it. But they can walk away when they decide to put a new bunk line in, whereas before that would become a major battle line. Today is, well, I hope that works.
Right.
I mean, and they're happy for them. They're happy for them because they provide the foundation that allows them to put that new bunk line or whatever in where they felt they never really could. And so they do become the best mentors. So I'm all about exit planning.
In the beef business, every decision counts. Drovers delivers the expert analysis, market updates, and real-world reporting that cattle producers rely on to make smart, profitable decisions. From market updates to policy shifts and animal health, Drovers delivers expert reporting and real-world analysis that helps producers stay ahead. With a mission to help beef producers become more profitable, every story is built around what matters most to the cattle industry. Get informed. Get Drovers.
I've got 3 children now, and it's like that father-child relationship or mother-child relationship. like in some ways you always see them and probably will always see them as a young kid. It's like, how do you get people to, see them as grown adults? Like, would you recommend that people who want to take over the farming operation or the ranching operation, like, go work somewhere else for 5 years? I mean, that's what my dad always said, like, go work somewhere else, go get some experience somewhere else. It feels like a bit offhand one, but if you've got a really good mentor there, why would I go work somewhere else? And it's like, how do people deal with that and bringing that expertise and getting people to be seen as grown-ups?
I don't have any problem with that approach at all. Actually, that's kind of a requirement. Some operation, nothing wrong with that at all. It does give them a structure experience they would not have experienced at home. That's all good. They can be gone too long. They're gone too long. They begin to change where the operation didn't change. I'll just make a statement. That's all. But yeah, I'm all for that. Whatever we can do to help facilitate that change and build skills of people and expose people is good. It really is.
I think that's a really critical point. We see it occasionally, especially in the feed yard sector, where dad's running the feed yard and he needs help. Now the son or the daughter is graduated from high school and, hey, you can start transitioning to take over this operation, but like, I want you to be assistant manager tomorrow, or feed mill manager, or some aspect of management on the operation. And then the child or the 18 or 20-year-old has to make the decision, okay, do I tell my parents that maybe I'm interested in pursuing something else, or going and getting an education, or going and doing an internship, procuring cattle or something else off of the operation. But then the parent looks back at them and says, like, sorry, I'm going to have to hire an assistant manager. So it's either going to be you or we're going to put somebody else in that position.
Correct.
And we don't know if that person will stay for 15 or 20 years. So do you want that? I think that is just as hard of a conversation. And so have you ever had a 22-year-old hire you to come and moderate in their operation?
Yeah. So the other part to that I'll add in is sometimes they're gone and they realize what they can make out there, and the parents say, well, I can't afford them. I can't afford them. And I welcome that conversation. So you can't afford somebody that's emotionally committed to your operation, or you just want to build more equity. Because if you don't pay them, you'll build more equity. But then what was the result of that? And so there's a lot of paradigms and things we have to get through. And eventually they bring them back because they realize we don't need that much more equity. We need the skill in the next generation.
Right.
And they don't want the turnover.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pieces to it. But again, it still comes back to the vision. We have that vision in place. All these things can be managed through. And I know that seems so simple, but it is simply where it starts, right there.
Yeah.
Just one question I'd like to get into, and our family. So I had 2 marriages, so we had 4 kids in the first, 2 of us in the second one, and that added a lot of complexity. But my eldest sister, she was the first one to take her bit of land and go off and start farming, and But I think one thing I'd say is both my mum, who was second wife, and plus my dad were very equitable when it came to genders, sexes. So can't say genders these days.
Yep.
But in terms of where that goes, do you see that as being a challenge in industry still? Because certainly the UK, where we lived for a while, it's only recently that the eldest daughter would take over in some of those situations. Is that still a challenge out there about how girls versus boys take the succession or expectations?
I think I think it's changing significantly. I have several transitions going on, of which we have both boys and girls, just saying it that way, and that's not even a factor. They're coming in. We don't look at it any different. Yes, we know we're going to have some. If somebody's having a baby, we got to manage through the different things, but that's just a little complexity in the bigger picture. And so if we're willing to adjust to if we're willing to adjust to those complexities, and yet we believe in the vision, we can do anything. I know that was a much tougher hurdle in the past. I believe we're really getting through that. If you look at the veterinary field, the number of gals that are in veterinary field, they're doing C-sections, everything else. I really believe we're busting through that. I sure hope so, because I've always looked for skill. I've never looked at gender. And so maybe I'm a little bit oblivious to that, but I can tell you in the transition, we don't talk about it that way at all. It's really about skill, people, family, where we going.
Is it? And then I suppose linking that is it still expected that the oldest would take over the family? You said it
Yeah.
earlier. And, I think what was really interesting to talking to Nick is like, Cody, who he works with, probably had the opportunity to be CEO, but like it went a totally different way within that family. And Nick was brought in because of skill to be the CEO. And I think that's like huge kudos to his family and to the family of how that happened. But, how do you deal with that expectation as well as like oldest versus youngest? Because the youngest mightn't be the most skilled at 18, but by the time he hits 25, he could be the guy who should be CEO.
Yeah, I think I think just naturally that happens. It's probably not so much an expectation. If you think about your oldest child, they were the oldest, and see the first one to give responsibility, the first one you leaned on, it just happens that way. And studying birth order, and I studied a lot of that, just trying to understand what's going on. There's a big difference. I think that's a natural transition. You just had them in the business longer. They're just committed to it, so that happens. It doesn't have to be a barrier. On the other hand, the youngest child, you think about that. We just tell them, just go with your older brother and sister. We teach them how to follow as parents. We taught them how to follow. And so if you have those situations, how do you teach people how to handle themselves differently, which becomes part of it? That's where business structure comes in. We'll put that one that's we taught how to follow in a lead position that fits their skills. And then we ask everybody else, you have to let them lead and you have to support. We have to build the skills. So I think we just do that in birth order and families naturally. I think there's less expectations anymore that the oldest one's going to be taking the farm, in my opinion.
Yep.
Could be wrong, than there was in the past. That's all. But they can make decisions. We put them in that position as parents. We did it.
Yeah, all that seems to be changing, and with good, with good reason. I mean, I see it as I look around operations and and see the daughters interested in coming back, and where do they fit into the operation and what skills do they have, and looking at some of those things, I think those are important. I think that's right. So
yeah, probably one last question from me as we talk about this. Be like, what have been some of the disasters? Like I've, in business and life, I feel like I've always learned from mistakes more than I have from success. Yeah. Like, when you look at, I'm sure not every one of the 400 ranches you've worked with has been a roaring success, and obviously definitely don't name names, but like, what are some of the things we can learn of where it's gone wrong, and where does it go wrong, and how badly can it go wrong?
It's interesting because of those 400, you're right, it's not 100% success, depending how you define that word. Yeah. Failure in an operation where clearly the vision was wrong, and we knew it was wrong, but people didn't have the courage to change, and therefore that operation is not doing well today. I can see the success in there that they had it wrong. I told them they had it wrong. We went through the discovery, but they'd still decided to go that direction anyway. And today, when it's unraveling, they know where they needed to get to. So now will they have the courage to get there? In other words, they shouldn't be in business together. We can talk about this vision. That's one thing. But we have to remember these are people. And should these people even be in business together? However they got there. There's a lot of siblings that should not be in business together. And will the parents have the courage to recognize that? And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. People are just different. Mm-hmm. They're just different. If you're willing to have the courage to see the differences in your own family and recognize that and be willing to use that to say, okay, how do I find success with who we are today? And still instead of trying to drive something that's not going to work. That's the tough stuff.
Yeah.
See the mechanics, how easy they are? The people side of this thing is what's really holding us back.
Yeah. I was going to say, because all of us ranchers and farmers and agriculture are great communicators.
Yeah.
Right.
Perfect.
That, that it's got to be succcessful. And no, but I think that's, as I talk to friends about some of this stuff, one of the things I find that's interesting is brothers over here or family members over here might have an idea or think of things that need to move in a certain direction, and they just don't communicate it with the other one.
Right.
Then they end up getting mad at the other one or something like that. I was talking to a couple friends, and they were like, yeah, I think sometimes, my brother or sister comes in and tells the office person something, so they'll tell me, so I know, and so that communication piece has got to be a very important part of your job as well.
We're not proud people, right? So we're amazing at self-reflection.
Yeah, that's right. So,
yeah, there's a lot of breakdowns of communication that result from people don't know what to do, and they don't know where to go next, and it only cascades from there. And so
you're just talking to each other, like you said. You know, start with coffee.
Yeah, coffee. That is where it starts. Keep it simple. Yeah. We got to know it's coffee.
What would the youngest age of the producer be that's come to you asking for you to facilitate succession within their operation?
Right out of college.
I think that's critical to mention, to let individuals know that you can go and get third-party help. And it's not a negative thing towards your parents. It's that you see the vision of the future of your operation and you want to make sure that you're all going in the same trajectory on that.
Yeah. See asking for help as a strength, not a weakness.
Yeah.
But again, I think it gets back to as we normalize this, what agriculture is going through, then people can begin to recognize that asking for help is a strength. Because you know what? Your parents want you to be successful too. Mm-hmm. It's all about finding success. It just happens we're in agriculture and we're handling all this money and we have all this equity and all this stuff going on. But I don't think anybody wants somebody to fail at all. I do believe, and I think this is important, we are losing another generation right now. I believe that. Because of the lack of information that's given. Back to your point, they're coming out of college. They're still inspired to come back. Mm-hmm. But once they lose their inspiration to come back due to the lack of information or being involved or whatever it is, they move on.
And when you mean information, like they're given the job as a pen writer, but they're not told what's happening in the business or anything like that. Is that what you're meaning? Like, you're not like they're there as a sort of almost hired help, but they're not really felt like they've been included within the business. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm really not. Great point, because those are all the mechanics. I'm talking about the estate planning information, depending on the stages, Grandpa and Graham. You could have folks that are in their late 40s and 50s that still don't own their home. Yeah. And so how can they lead their own children at that age if there's a level of information that's never been provided? I didn't say give it assets. I'm saying we need to get planning in place. So estate planning and transition and succession, even though they're distinctly different, there is a common connection. You start learning about generational transfer, the more transparent we can get that information, then it becomes a known. Otherwise, unknowns, we can't manage it. If we can get it to become a known, now we can manage it, we can plan.
Well, and it's a scary thought. Like I just see how lucky I've been is like getting to 40, 50, like I'm mid 40s, but, and not living on a promise.
Yeah.
The number of people I do speak to are out there and they're working and they're living on a promise and there's no will or paperwork necessarily that could even get that to a situation. And then they know they're going to have a fight with their siblings if the father passes. Like, that's the scariest thought, and I feel for those people in those situations.
And again, it doesn't mean the older generation doesn't want to. They don't know where to begin. They don't know what to do. Back to...
And they don't want to cause a fight between their children.
Fear of conflict.
Yes.
No question. Fear of conflict is real. That'll stop a lot of things.
Yeah.
But, boy... So they want to spend the rest of their life worrying about this? Or do we want to spend the rest of our life enjoying and helping the visions of our individual children where they want to take that? It's a fundamental choice, same assets. Again, back to coffee. That's where it starts. I'm always amazed at how quickly we'll get that deep, depending on who it is. Those are just the questions that get asked, and they will pick, I don't want to spend the rest of my life worrying about this stuff.
Yeah, and I think it goes both ways, right? I mean, sometimes the parent doesn't want to cause conflict with the children, but sometimes the children don't want to ask the parent for something either. They don't want to cause that sort of, I don't really want to do that discussion. I don't want to talk about death with my parents, and what that looks like. But those conversations need to happen, and we can't be afraid of them. And I think that's one of the keys for me is you just can't be afraid of those conversations. Courageous conversations is what we need to have in this thing.
I think we talk a lot about like how it can work out negatively, but like I've even, with all the ranchers we're working with, and I know they're already forward thinking because they're adopting technology and they're thinking about stuff differently. But the thing I've seen is actually when you have these conversations, the positive impact it has on the ranch in terms of bringing in new ideas, in terms of bringing in better business, in terms of just ownership. Like one person can't necessarily own all aspects of that business. And, I think the bit that excites me when this happens is often these businesses start to grow faster.
Absolutely.
And better. And there's more ownership and there's more passion and there's all of that sort of stuff. And I think that's where I'd encourage people to sort of look to is like when I've seen it happen, and, the best compliment I've ever had, which was from a rancher, was like, we love your app. And I went, you've never used it. You're 65, never opened the app. And he goes, no. My son would have never come back to the farm if it wasn't for technology. And that I saw them the other day, and he's now running every part of the farming operation, but he was just doing the cattle when he started. And I think that positive impact it has on business when you get this stuff right is just huge.
You go from the costs of not being focused and being on defense to the opportunities of offense.
Yeah.
And I'm a linebacker. I like defense. But this is
I
the
could tell when
case
you
where
walked in.
I really like offense. And you'll see that over that year and a half I work with operations, I'll see a shift from defense to offense. That's what happens. And that's how I know we're making progress. You can't see today in this transitional experience the gains. You have to look back at where you started. It's a process over a period of time. It is not a moment. And don't look for perfect because you will cause imperfection. Those are a couple of statements, but it's very, very important. And every once in a while, people need a hug. Tough stuff.
Yeah. Back to the therapist part.
Yeah.
If this
very
microphone
emotional.
wasn't here, I'd be out. Don't worry.
That's really why we're interviewing you,
so
Alan.
bring it on. Right? No, I think that's all good stuff, and I think that this is a very timely and important conversation to have. And I think as we, encourage listeners and look at other tools that they have that they can use on the operation. I mean, this is one of them, and we see it a lot. We see people bringing in breeder. We see people bringing in nutritionists. We see people bringing in veterinarians as consultants these days because we can't do it all. And we see that type of thing coming in. Why not, a person to help with this? So,
Well, my favorite thing that we said was that it's never too early to have that conversation. Like if you're a student right now in college and your aspiration is to go home, make sure that your parents know that. And let them know that. And maybe you're going to be gone for 5 years, but you're going to gain a lot of skill sets, but let them know that you eventually want to go home.
Yeah. You're inspired to come home.
Yeah.
This is your vision, what you want to do.
And then they'll work
Perfect.
with you on it.
Excellent.
yeah. So if you had one thing that you could tell people today, and it might be, we may have already said it, start with coffee, but if you had one thing you could just tell people and ranching and agriculture today, is there something that pops to your brain?
Without vision, we shall perish. Proverbs. It's in the Bible.
Yep.
Take that home.
How old is that, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So any other questions, Ian, Jess?
No, it's great. Thank you very much, Alan. It's
Thank
been
you.
really appreciated. This is I think it's a topic that not enough people talk about. And, I love it. Grab a coffee,
Yeah.
If people want to get in touch with us over the podcast, we'll pass on your details. We'll make sure there's links in the show notes. But really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Can I throw in a plug?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm with the South Dakota Ag Foundation, guys, and we do need funding so we can expand this program. But I think the U.S. needs to take this seriously.
And Canada.
And how can they approach it? Different organizations, but it's about getting third-party people in the country, getting them trained to help agriculture through this.
Yep. So good. We'll put that foundation in the show notes. So
Perfect.
if
Thank you.
people want to get in touch, or the ranch doesn't have heirs and they want to leave everything to the foundation, that's all awesome too. So
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Stay tuned. It's time for Ian, Jess, and I to go behind the beef. All right. So that was a great episode. That was maybe one of my favorites so far. What did you guys think?
Yes. Informative, and also something that we don't talk enough about in agriculture, but something that's really needed.
Yeah. And it essentially can apply to all of us, right? Yes. I mean, we get into some of these other ones, and if you're a seed stock producer, you might tune out on the feedlot side or whatever, right? But this one just kind of applies to everybody in all segments.
Yeah, and look, I think it was great, and it's lovely to sit down and talk about it, having had experience going through it in a way that, there's always ways you can do stuff better, but, I think the approach that Alan brings in terms of that vision and making sure that you get everyone aligned, but, I think if I was to look at it, I'd say some of the things that even then we didn't probably talk about enough is the emotions of it and the different people and the different personalities. We touched on some of that, but how do you deal with different personalities in that? And it sounds like, it all sounds great when we're structuring it out here, but I'm sure Alan has to deal with a lot with different personalities, different coaching. How do you get one person to align with another person when they're coming at from a completely different angle? But, I did like the fact that everything's a gift, right? And I think as you approach this as the younger generation, look at it as a gift. And, I think that resonated a lot with me as well. It's an amazing opportunity that we get given as, going through a generation as producers.
Yeah, I liked we're looking for peace, right? Yeah. And we're not looking to divide up things equally or whatever that is. We're looking for peace within the family. And what does that mean, right? What does peace actually mean? It means that everybody's comfortable with where we're going, what we're doing, and the vision of where the operation's going. So I thought that was really interesting.
Mm-hmm. I like the part about the parents wanting the best for their children, no matter what ventures the children were interested in taking. So not just the gift of the parents giving the operation to the child that wants it, but supporting the other children that maybe want to have a life off of the farm or off of the operation. My other favorite part was that it doesn't have to be left up to the parents or the grandparents to start the succession planning talk. I mean, Alan mentioned right out of college, some individuals have reached out. And I mean, if you want to get your son or daughter excited about the future of agriculture, or the future of beef, how can you do that? Well, it's by ensuring that they do have a place in the operation and that the vision for the operation is going to go long into the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And also how you deal with that. I mean, he talked a lot about the information of how it's structured and all of that sort of stuff. And I think when I went through that personally, that was done amazingly well by my mom and my dad and everything else that we went through on that, and huge credit to them. I think the other side of it though is which I see as equally important, is what he was talking about of just getting involved on the monthly financials. How do you build that trust where that person goes from being a son or a daughter to a partner, right, in business? And I think that for me, that, really resonates when you start to think about, they're now not just the person who's going to get it someday. They're the person who's helping make it a success today and part of those business decisions early on. And I think, that takes a lot of guts from the parents to be able to bring them into it and give them enough room to fail. Because look, we've all failed, and we definitely failed more when we're 18 than we do now, hopefully. But, I'm still doing a fair bit of it. So, but yeah, it's, those sort of things are I thought, yeah, really, really good points. And it's not simple, right? Sometimes when you go into corporate America, all this planning and development of people and how you get them to being managers and how do you help them grow and all of that sort of stuff does become second nature. And we just don't do that as much in ranching and farming as what we do in other areas of business.
Yeah. And the other thing I think that stood out to me was, are you more interested in building equity, mm-hmm. or are you more interested in bringing in the younger generation and paying them appropriately, right? Mm-hmm. I think that really, because I think as a lot of these operations start with people that are really driven, mm-hmm. right? And they're really focused and they're really driven and they're willing to sacrifice. And then, so changing that mindset from bigger is always better to fostering that next generation in in the appropriate way is a different.
It's how do you combat the, first generation starts it, second generation builds it, third generation spends it. Like, how do you combat that, and how do you get them to be thinking about it as a multi-generational business rather than like being left alone just to get some cash and then be like, okay, well, what do I do? I'm going to spend it. And back to my previous point, it's sort of like to get that third generation involved in the business and setting the goals and running it as a business is a pretty important thing.
Yeah. One thing we didn't talk about, and you see it occasionally, is transitioning that to an outside person, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe there isn't heirs that are interested or whatever. And then how do you then transition that legacy onto somebody else? And so maybe that's something I should have asked in that thing, but that's another segment that we see occasionally.
Yeah. And I've seen that with people I know where they've, those ranchers, for whatever reason, their children didn't want to take it over and they've transitioned it to someone else. And how do you manage that through the process? And because quite often, it's expensive for someone who may be very good to get into farming.
Oh, yeah.
That can also be an opportunity for that person to gradually buy them out and do those sort of things. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe, you're a new farmer in the area and you've been renting from an individual that does not have a succession plan because they do not have offspring. Maybe it's just them, no other family. And so I don't know. We probably should have asked Alan that.
Yeah. And how do you even approach those people?
How do you approach those people? Maybe you've rented their land for 10 years.
Yeah. We're going to have to get him back. It's too late.
Yeah, for sure. Part 2.
Yeah.
Think of the list of questions. But no, I think any of those questions that we have, right, that maybe we didn't ask, also leads towards the reason to find somebody like Alan
A third party
that can help us with those types of things, because that's not something we intuitively know, right?
No, and everyone's different. Everyone's coming from this from a different perspective. Everyone has different life experiences. So, having someone there as that coach to get you through, and help point you all in the same direction. I think, it's amazing service they're offering. I think hopefully it goes really well and the not-for-profit that they're setting up now, and, really wish him all the best.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Future of Beef Show. Don't forget to check us out at thefutureofbeef.com to take your operation to the next level. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Until next time, keep your boots on the ground and keep your eyes on the future.